Story 3: The Lightless Cave. In the easternmost region of Earia, within the great forest kingdom of Sarkahlt, there lies a most mysterious cave. Just inside the entrance is a small wooden sign. The runes upon it are written in the first tongue, a language spoken now by only the oldest and most mystical of beings, as well as a small handful of learned humans. The venerable monk, Halstead the Grey, translated the runes in one of his later works, titled The Bounty of Earia. It reads, "Have no fear, move fast or slow. Darkness sometimes reveals more than glow can show. Walk for a while, think on life's troubles. Just remember, there is always light at the start of this tunnel." The cave and its mysterious sign have been a popular destination for adventurers and scholars alike, both groups believing that it contains something of immense value. For years, they scoured every nook and cranny. Not that there were many to scour, as the cave only went back roughly 20 feet before ending in a solid expanse of gray stone. Throughout the daylight hours, they would poke and prod the walls, looking for hidden switches or openings that might lead further forward, but all were unsuccessful. They would leave in disappointment once the sun began its final descent below the trees that surrounded the cave, none wanting to be stuck in the gloomy forest after dark. Eventually, once it became apparent that the cave would not give up its secrets, if it indeed had any, easily, the constant stream of curious seekers gradually came to a halt, with everyone agreeing that every inch of the place had been examined and that there were no switches or buttons or openings to be found. Only seamless, gray, cold stone. One bright spring morning, many years after the visitors had ceased their inquiries, a young hunter named Thomas found himself taking shelter from a terrible storm inside its opening. As he sat by the small fire he had built and watched the sheets of rain pour from the sky, he thought about his reason for being in the great forest of Sarkahlt. Thomas was tracking one of the rarest and most elusive creatures that could be found in all of Earia, the great horned Trebmal. While similar in size and appearance to their smaller cousins, the common Trebmal, the great horned Trebmal differed in 3 key ways. Firstly, they are, as their name would suggest, much larger than their cousins. Secondly, they were not friendly at all, preferring to spend their lives in solitude, not even living with others of their kind. And lastly, the 3 curved horns that adorned their head were not made of bone, as are those of the lesser Trebmals, but instead of gold and silver. Every hunter dreamed of finding one of these majestic and hard-to-capture creatures, for not only were their horns of immense value, but given enough time after harvesting, they would regrow, ensuring a never-ending supply of wealth for their lucky owner. Thomas sat for a time, his mind racing with ideas and hopes. Eventually, exhausted both physically and mentally, he dozed off, the sound of the rain falling combined with the warmth of the fire lulling him into a gentle snooze. His dreams were filled with visions of his elusive quarry. In them, he finally managed to capture and subdue the Trebmal, bringing it back to his home city of Albion. He would be showered with wealth and comfort, fame and accolades for his accomplishment. He would never know again the pain of hunger or want. With its lustrous horns, he would build a legacy that would endure for years and years to come. A sudden, deafening boom of thunder awoke Thomas from his pleasant dreams. With a start, he jerked awake, looking about himself groggily. Somehow, he had slept through the remainder of the day, and now found himself surrounded by the deep darkness of night. His fire had burned out hours ago, and was now only a pile of gray ash on the ground. Wanting to escape the cold air and rain blowing through the yawning opening, Thomas quickly gathered his things and moved them farther back into the cave. As he fumbled ahead blindly in the darkness, Thomas held one hand out in front of him, in anticipation of the rear wall that was not far past the entrance. "It should be about here," he mumbled as he braced his hand against. Nothing. Another step. Nothing. 10, 15, 100 more steps. Still nothing. By now, Thomas had walked far enough into the cave that the sounds of the storm no longer reached him, and the air around him was warm and dry. He had lost count of his steps many minutes ago, but they were surely much more than they should have been. With curiosity, and no small amount of fear, Thomas continued forward, one hand out, thinking that surely the next step would bring him up against cold stone. After a time, Thomas thought to change direction, to see if the cave had gotten wider as well as longer. He turned to his left and proceeded forward with his hands still outstretched. He once again counted his steps, and once again walked so long that he lost count of the number. But still, his hands swayed through empty air. After walking for what seemed to be hours, it was hard to accurately judge time in the pitch-black darkness of the cave. Thomas plopped himself down on the hard ground, dropping his gear beside him. As he sat there catching his breath, a disturbing realization hit him. He was lost, hopelessly lost, with nothing to see, hear, or feel that might lead him back to the entrance. He strained his ears and listened, searching hard for the sounds of the storm that had driven him further into the cave, but heard nothing but his own ragged breathing and the frantic beating of his heart. After catching his breath, Thomas stood and shouldered his pack. "Well, it's like Pop always used to say." He spoke quietly into the dark void around him. "If there's no going back, you gotta move forward." And so he did, wandering deeper and deeper into the mysteriously large cave. It was not an entirely unpleasant trek. The air was warm and wholesome. There were no objects to run into or trip over, and though he had been walking for quite a long time, he did not feel hungry or thirsty in the slightest, only needing to pause occasionally to sit and rest his legs. With no distractions of sight or sound, Thomas's mind wandered freely. He thought about his childhood, his mother and father, his siblings, 2 brothers and 3 sisters, and their life in the city of Albion. It had been a tough upbringing, to be sure, but Thomas's parents had always done their best to provide for their family. His mother worked all day as a scrub woman and spent a good portion of her nights cooking at the local inn, while his father toiled in the fields during the daylight hours and worked as a watchman during the evenings. He would patrol the walls of Albion late into the night, watching and listening for any signs of disturbance. Thomas spent most of his time among the trees and rivers of the forest that lay close by Albion's edge, tracking and catching creatures and recording how he had done so. He had always had an affinity with animals, and he knew his way through the forests of Albion better than any man twice his age. During one of his early hunts, Thomas had managed to catch not one, but an entire brace of shimmer quail, a species of bird so elusive and rare that many hunters could go their whole lives without catching a single one. He had found his calling, and upon becoming a man a few years later, left Albion in search of greater and greater quarry. His reputation grew with the passing years, until Thomas was recognized by all of his peers as a hunter of immense talent. But, as his fame grew, so did his ego. Hunting and taming creatures had once been his passion, but had somewhere along the way become just a job, something he did just to earn wealth and recognition. As Thomas wandered in the warm void of the cave, he came to realize that he had lost his way, not only in his current predicament, but also in his life. Where once he would have been happy to just lay eyes upon a creature as rare and magnificent as the great horned Trebmal, now he only thought about what he could gain by capturing it. "What a fool I've become," Thomas muttered, shaking his head in disappointment. "To think, I spent my whole life trying to escape from the shackles of common drudgery, only to find myself caught up in the same cycle of greed and self-importance. If I ever manage to get myself out of this cave, I am going to make some changes." As Thomas came to this realization, he was surprised by a sudden ray of blinding sunlight. To his shock, the light came not from in front of him, but from behind. The light grew stronger, and the walls of the cave once again became visible. He looked about himself in astonishment. Although he had been walking all night, the entrance to the cave was right behind him. The rear and side walls were once again solid and impenetrable, lit by the soft light of the morning sun. Although he was quite exhausted, Thomas smiled and shrugged his pack higher upon his shoulders. His passions had been reignited in the darkness of the mysterious cave. He remembered now that he had set out on his journey not for riches, but for his love of freedom and the challenges that come with it. With these thoughts in mind, he set forth from the mouth of the cave, eager to live up to the lessons he had learned in the warm, comforting darkness. Thomas would go on to have many other adventures, capturing and taming hundreds of mystical and dangerous creatures. His time in the cave forever remained in his mind, a reminder to never lose sight of that which is most important to him. The end.